Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm delighted to be here today, your host, Maurice Collins, Chief Operating Officer with InfoReady, to share with you a peer spotlight highlighting Texas Tech's Scholarship Catalyst program. Today, we're joined by Dr. Abigail Swingen and Mariah Gonzalez, who are the administrators of the program there at Texas Tech. So they have a bunch of great information to share with you, and we're looking forward to getting things underway. Before we start, just a couple, housekeeping pieces of information. So we anticipate this will take about 60 minutes, about 20 minutes for the presenters to present their material, and then we'll have about 30 minutes of Q&A for you all. If you do want to submit a question, please use the question and answer feature of Zoom. Your phones have been muted, so you won't necessarily be able to participate that way. The webinar will be recorded, so if there is a situation that you want to see this or share it with your peers or your fellow institution folks, then by all means let us know, and we're happy to pass that along. Also, if you don't mind, once you get done with the webinar here today, there will be a post-webinar survey. We cherish those responses, so please, if you can, take a couple minutes to fill that out. Tell us what we can do differently and how we can make it even more valuable for you. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my Texas Tech colleagues here and let them begin their webinar.
Hi everyone, my name is Mariah Gonzalez and I'm a lead administrator for the Office of Research and Innovation. Before joining the office, I worked in the post-award team in the Office of Research Services. That's Texas Tech sponsored projects office. I earned both a bachelor and master's degree from Texas Tech and loved the university atmosphere so much I decided to pursue a career here. Next slide, please. Texas Tech is located in Lubbock, Texas. Here's the downtown. Oh, can you go back? Just one. There we go. Here's the downtown Lubbock skyline for you. As you can see, Lubbock has a very flat landscape. For those of you who aren't familiar with Texas, Texas Tech is located right about here on the map, just in the heart of West Texas, or more commonly known as the Panhandle. Next slide.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Swingen. I'm an Associate VP for Research in the Office of Research and Innovation. I'm also an Associate Professor of History at Texas Tech. And the Office of Research and Innovation at Tech does a variety of different things related to the research enterprise for faculty at Texas Tech. We provide various internal funding programs like the one we're going to talk about today. We also provide services for proposal submission. That's what the Office of Research Services takes care of. And Mariah, as she mentioned, used to work there. We also have a division called the Office of Research Development, and they help with proposal development for external grant proposals. So we do a variety of different things related to the research enterprise. We also help with figuring out startup costs and things like that for new faculty. We do all sorts of different things. Next slide. So I'll start by talking about the Scholarship Catalyst program. This is a competitive internal funding program that is sponsored by our office, the Office of the President, and the Office of the Provost. And it varies in terms of amount per year, depending on budget situations, of course. And it's designed specifically for faculty who are not in the STEM fields. So it is designed specifically for folks in the humanities, social sciences, and visual and performing arts. We have other programs that are for all faculty that are primarily used by STEM faculty. So one of the sort of reasons for the existence of the Scholarship Catalyst program is to help those faculty who are not in STEM fields, who tend to need a little less money, quite honestly, and where a little bit of money can go a really long way. The program supports both new research projects that are winding up, midpoint of projects in all sorts of different fields and categories. Journal articles, books, travel to archives, for example, or other location-specific research. That's the kind of stuff that the Scholarship Catalyst program funds. We usually award $3,500 per project. Sometimes that varies. Sometimes we get a little, if someone has requested a little bit more money, then sometimes we're able to provide that. But that's the usual average for our program. Next slide.
Moving on to our timeline for the program, we aim to launch the applications around the start of the fall semester. Our announcements consist of emails to our college deans, associate deans, department chairs, utilizing our Texas Tech announcement board, and then also working with our communications teams to include those program details in department newsletters. I monitor the submissions, and then once the application closes, Abby and I review the applications submitted to make sure the applicants meet the eligibility criteria. Abby and I then review the applications submitted to make sure that, and then Abby looks at the past committees for the reviewers and then works on putting them together. Once those reviewers have been confirmed, I work on assigning the applications to the appropriate categories. And so then we have reviewers on only certain categories, and so they're not reviewing every one of them. So we have definite expertise in those review areas. One thing to note is that our reviewers are asked to read all of our applications for that given category, but they only serve as primary reviewers on about half of the applications. So that way we have multiple eyes on all of the applications that we receive. This is really important when we have our discussions for those review committees and, just different insights and backgrounds coming together to see, what is remarkable about these projects and, just being able to see what can be achieved, as well as just the commentary that happens in these review committees. So then moving on, I create a spreadsheet with like applicant details, whether the individual has received an award previously, award amounts, just details that can help with the review process when we're working on them. Especially when we move virtually, just to be able to see those on a screen right there in front of everybody and not having to refer back to the InfoReady site. Excuse me. And so this year we also had to think about COVID-related extensions, so reports that were coming in. That is also really important just to make sure that awardees are following through with those reports, and just if they've really had any obstacles, especially with COVID that's happened in last year. And then we also include average overall ratings and then the average ratings for each award criteria or the review criteria. So it's definitely good to have that just for the review committees, like I said, to refer back to. The review meetings discuss the applicants and then the work proposed. And then we also look at the possible successful completion of that proposed project. Awardees are then decided upon by the committee, and then award amounts, as Abby has mentioned, can be more or less, just depending on budget and things like that. And then after that, we work with our department business manager just to confirm or final confirmation of our budget to make sure that we're good to go on moving forward with that before any notifications go out. Then I work on sending those notifications out via email before the Thanksgiving break, so before we go into holidays and things like that, so everybody is aware. There is a bit of work that has to happen on the department level, just with setting up accounts, account numbers, getting that information to our researchers to make sure they have that to put the expenses on. So there is some work that does happen between various people before they can actually get started. Once all of those applicants have been notified and they accept their award and they receive their account numbers, then in January, those funds are made available and they are able to begin work. And so it's just another cycle throughout the year. They're working on these projects. And then over the course of the year, they are able to submit reports to the office. We only require one. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But one thing I would like to add is that our application does get revised every year. It's kind of grown and developed over the years. And so each year, Abby and I, once applications closes, we look at, what could we have done better? What could we have added? I mean, even this last year, it's been going on for a couple of years now, and we still find things that we can add, things that make it easier for our reviewers just to be able to go and refer back to. And so it is definitely evolving, and it's not, completely perfect, but, we try to make it as perfect as it can be, and it's easier for our reviewers to go in and just have all of that information available to them in one page. Next slide.
So thank you so much, Mariah. That was super helpful. In terms of what is fundable, what is allowable with this program, we've had to make some decisions, but generally speaking, it's anything related to the research process, or almost anything related to the research process. Defraying costs, again, related to travel to archives, small equipment purchases, graduate student salaries if you need a research assistant for the summer or something like that. Those kinds of things are allowed. Generally speaking, this pool of funding has not funded travel to conferences, although the research that gets created from this program often results in conference presentations down the road. We actually have a separate faculty travel grant, which we're not running this year because of COVID. But nevertheless, we try to keep travel to conferences in a separate category from this, because this is about generating research. This is about creative activity. It can't go toward faculty salary or food or receptions and things like that. Nor can it go toward a department or a unit making a major equipment purchase. We've had a few applications from entire units requesting funding for large equipment, and we're just not equipped to do that kind of thing. It's really about the individual faculty member or his or her team of researchers doing a project. It's not about the department or the unit per se. In terms of eligibility, any tenure track or tenured faculty member doing a project in the humanities, visual and performing arts, or social sciences is eligible to apply. Now that means that folks who are in STEM departments are by all means welcome to apply, so long as the project is in a category like arts, humanities, or social sciences. And we have had folks, particularly in engineering, who are co-PIs or are working with people in the humanities or the arts in particular and they are eligible, even though they are not technically a non-STEM person. They're doing a non-STEM project though, or a non-STEM related project. So they are certainly eligible to apply. Usually applicants, it's usually just one person applying, but sometimes, particularly in the social sciences, there are co-PIs. You can be a lead applicant on one and a co-PI on another, just so there isn't too much overlap or confusion in a given year. And we try to give preference to folks who don't have startup funds left, or whose startup funds are spoken for. And so oftentimes this program funds folks who are sort of beyond their first, second, third year. So sort of advanced assistant professors and folks at the associate level. That tends to be the bulk of people that we're funding in the program. This isn't a hard and fast rule. This is just sort of a guideline for reviewers. We also try to give preference to folks who've never gotten this funding before, again, just out of fairness and making sure that everybody has the opportunity. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. So this is just a couple of screenshots of what we require in InfoReady, basically in terms of basic information from the applicants themselves, as well. And it's in the tiny print there, but application requirements. We ask for a brief abstract, and then we ask for basically a 3-page explanation or description of the project, anticipated outcomes, what the goals are, and what we really hope to get from folks is really an explanation of why their project matters in terms of their own career trajectory in particular. Like this is necessary in order for me to achieve tenure or promotion, or this is an important step toward applying for this grant or finishing up this journal article. That kind of information excuse me, is really helpful. We also ask them to provide a little bit of information in terms of what they're going to spend the money on. We don't ask for a specific budget breakdown, but it is, we do want to know, okay, for example, I do British history. I need to go to archives in London when things are normal. And so if I were to apply, I would want to write something to that effect. Like I would use this money to support a research trip for a month in London, or something like that, just so we know what the money is going to be used for, and that we know that it's allowable. And we also ask for a brief CV, and we also have the usual language, making sure that folks are being on the up and up when they apply for things, and that they're not plagiarizing, for example, or utilizing other people's work in their application. So anyway, that's just sort of what we require of the applicants, and how we use InfoReady to help run this program. So next slide. So review committees, Mariah already touched upon this a little bit, but because we have, as I mentioned, we have 3 categories in the Scholarship Catalyst program. We have humanities, visual and performing arts, and social sciences. So we have 3 separate review committees for each of those categories. So it sort of depends on the year, but this year each category had roughly about 20 or so applications. So the humanities review committee, the social science review committee, and the arts review committee were roughly reviewing the same number of applications. It's made up of faculty. It's often made up of folks who've won the award in the past. Also other stakeholders. For example, sometimes we've had on the humanities review committee, we've had the director of the Texas Tech Humanities Center serve as a reviewer, which makes sense because he or she will have an interest and will know some of the faculty involved in their projects, and so it's helpful to have their perspective. So that's just an example of one of the stakeholders who might be involved. And we do require that the reviewers themselves have not applied for that given cycle. So there's reducing conflict of interest. Generally speaking, there's a list of selection criteria there. Basically, I mean, it's about quality of proposal, and sort of how it measures up against the other proposals. The track record of the applicant is important, particularly if it's a mid-career scholar in particular. But also it's about again, career advancement, recognition for the individual faculty member or their research team. How realistic is this? But all that sort of boils down to is quality, and the ability of the applicant to convey the significance of their project and why it matters and why it deserves funding. So next slide. Oh, sorry, Mariah, you were going to do this one.
All right. So as Abby mentioned earlier, the Office of Research Development plays a role in this program as well. Awardees are required to meet with a member of that team and sit down, talk to them, work through their project, what resources are available to them, and then just be able to guide them through this process. Ideally, most of them are looking to submit an external proposal. So there's grant writing, services that they offer, as well as workshops. And they've really grown and developed these programs for our faculty members. And so it's definitely a big help to them as they're going through this process. And then also just touching back on it, awardees are expected to submit at least one report. We do welcome multiple reports over the course of their project, and just as they're developing this proposal or activity or whatever it is that they're working on. This also does help us track program outcomes and successes. When the president's office comes back and asks for a report, what have we done over the last year? What have we done over the last 3 or 5 years? These reports definitely help us go back and track down what external proposal was submitted, what activities were done, publications, things like that, that we're always welcoming and interested to know about. Individuals do, as Abby just touched on as well, oftentimes end up serving on these review committees. They've been through the process. They know what a project like this looks like, what's feasible also. And then they are sometimes also asked to present their work, activities, findings at any events that are sponsored by the office. And that's really all I had. Abby, did you have anything to add to that?
And we can do next slide. So this is just an overview of the number of applications and awards that we've been able to give over the past several years, going back to 2017. So the 2017 cycle is for funding for 2018, for example. So the 2021, those numbers were just handled in fall of 2020. And the funding is available for the calendar year of 2021. As Mariah explained, we've had to, be very flexible, understandably, because of COVID. People can't travel, people can't do their face-to-face research with human subjects, for example. There's all sorts of things. Conferences get canceled that we, or just, research has not been able to, go forward at in any sort of sense of normality. So we've had to be flexible. I have no idea why there are such fluctuations any given year. It seems to be in even years that it dips down, and then in odd years it goes right back up. So I don't really know. There's no rhyme or reason for that. But in terms of awards, we're able to fund between 25 and 35 faculty or individual projects, in a given year. So next slide. And again, this is just some raw data outcomes. Mariah mentioned having to, write reports for the president's office and the provost's office. Well, I certainly had to do that this past summer in light of budget concerns because of COVID and other reasons. And so we sort of scoured those reports, the Qualtrics reports that people submit. And I also followed up with some folks, just sent an email saying, hey, I know some of these projects, we asked for a report at a given date and time, but those research endeavors keep going. And so what else, are there other outcomes that we should know about? Excuse me. And so this just gives sort of a broad overview of the kinds of things that folks are doing, ranging from grant proposal submissions to creating apps for public use, to music performances, all sorts of things that we help fund and help sort of catalyze and get off the ground. I think that's it for us, isn't it? Yeah, and here's our contact information. So please feel free if your question doesn't get answered later on, or if you come up with another question later on to write to either me or Mariah. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you both for that presentation. We do have a handful of questions here. So if you don't mind, we'll just jump straight into that. I honestly have a question myself. I'm curious on. As to annually, do you need to go and justify and effectively reestablish funds for this program every year, or how do you approach that, and how do you justify the spend that the university is making?
Well, we collect that information basically, like that was on that previous slide. And I, as someone in the humanities, I don't like to use the phrase return on investment, but that's absolutely the phrase that gets used. And so we haven't had to do it every year. We often have to remind the other entities, just a gentle nudge like, hey, are you still going to fund this program with us? And here's the annual report with all the information about the folks we funded and the projects that got off the ground and things like that. This year was a little unusual in that the president's office asked for a very detailed report, but those are just the extenuating circumstances of ongoing budget concerns. And it wasn't anything unusual. All entities were having to do that. So it's not every year that we have to do that, but there's a review process, and the VPR, the Vice President for Research, he has been very active in making sure that these programs work and that folks are utilizing them. And when we have concerns or issues, that we talk about them, that we talk through them, that we tweak the program, like Mariah said. These are, sort of living organic things. They're not, the rules might need to change in a given year for whatever reason. So.
Sure. Okay. There's been a handful of questions around the reviewer aspect of it. Outside of the recipients that you select to be a part of the reviewer process, can you talk a little bit about how you recruit for the reviewer committees, what sort of criteria you have for them, and what sort of training or onboarding you do for that group?
Usually, honestly, in the first instance, it's going to be folks who have gotten this award in the past or who have applied in the past. I don't, as a general rule, I want to ask folks who are tenured. I don't want to, impose on an untenured colleague, because it's a lot of time, and it could be awkward for an untenured colleague to be reviewing applications from tenured colleagues in particular. So those are my general criteria in the first instance. Again, other stakeholders, sometimes, like I said, the director of the Humanities Center is someone who is often involved. Sometimes we have an associate dean for research from a given college that's appropriate to the category. And I also will ask associate deans for research or department chairs for suggestions sometimes, if not the department chairs themselves. Again, keeping in mind that they're also super busy. So in terms of onboarding, there's sort of a technical aspect to that in terms of InfoReady, and just sort of giving people a little bit of, walking through like how to use the software, how to use the interface, how to download the applications, and how to use the rating system, which Mariah is very good at explaining that information to them. And then, again, there isn't a whole lot of training or anything that goes into it. I really try to make sure that the eligibility requirements are clear, and that the criteria for selection are clear. Beyond that, I don't really impose too much, or I try not to impose too much of my own sort of, what I think is a good proposal. The committee may not. I'm there as sort of as an ex officio. I'm not, I will take notes, and I will sort of run the meeting. And I might, if someone asks the question, I might, try to answer that, or I will try to answer that. But, I defer almost 100% of the time. Whenever the eligibility is met, I defer to the committee. So there isn't a whole lot of training per se, beyond sort of the technical aspect. These are all faculty members that have reviewed proposals before in other capacities for external professional societies, for example, or external awards. And so, for the most part, it's smooth sailing in terms of what they know what to look for. They know what a good proposal should look like. So I don't know if
Wonderful.
Mariah, you want to add anything about the technical stuff?
No, I think you covered everything.
Well, thank you for that. It sounds like a pretty elaborate but yet sort of elegant process by going through and finding really the right people to do those committees and serve on those committees can really, I'm assuming, really impact the outcome of who gets awarded and what is the result of that funding.
And it's definitely a challenge, you know, to write those emails in, say, late September, early October, and say, wouldn't you like to review 20 proposals before Thanksgiving? You know, thanks. You'll have my eternal gratitude. I mean, but we all have to, you know, in the research endeavor, that's always a challenge. And so, I mean, I think because the program's been around for 5 or 6 years, faculty are familiar with it at this point. And even when people say no, they're usually saying no in like a, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I just don't have the time kind of way, and not just like, what are you, you know, that I'm just going to ignore you. So I think people are invested in the program at this point, again, because it's been around for 5 or 6 years. Wouldn't you say, Mariah?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will say too, we also try and express our, you know, gratitude to these people. We write letters, and so usually we do mail those out. We mail hard copy signed letters out to our reviewers. This year they went out via email, but just because everybody was kind of spread out everywhere during the time, and so just to make sure that they got them and they received them, it is something that we definitely still wanted to do for them. It goes a long way, just having that letter. And then also people that aren't necessarily lower in rank, but do report, you know, to their associate dean for research or department chairs. This is something that, you know, they can see that the service that they're giving in the area of research.
You know, and that's exactly right. We send these thank you notes, and we usually will CC their department chair, so their chair knows, hey, this person put in 2 or 3 weeks of really important service that maybe should be noted in their annual review, for example. This is the stuff that keeps the university operational. You know, this is what keeps us moving, is making sure faculty are able to do their research. And so that's a really important point, Mariah.
All right, so let's switch gears here a little bit. So there's a question around intellectual property. So what sort of guidelines do you have around ownership of that property that's produced or as a product of these awards?
I mean, we basically follow the same rules of the university. I mean, they aren't any different from this one. And quite honestly, because these are non-STEM, there aren't a whole lot of IP issues that have come up. But if they did, they would follow the same university rules and regulations. Mariah, I don't know if you want to add anything.
We have an office, research commercialization, that does help guide researchers and make sure that they're following all the proper protocols. Research development can help guide these researchers if they see that there is an IP issue or something that they need to be aware of. A lot of times it's just making a meeting with them and sitting down talking through whatever it is, and then they usually guide our researchers from that point on. But I wouldn't say there's anything that's outstanding or any different from a regular, you know, if it was a STEM field even, why there would be any difference in the process there.
Okay, and along the same thread, the funding that you award, can it go towards publications and supporting the publication process?
Like open access?
Yeah.
Generally, no. We actually have a separate program for that. We have an open access publication initiative that awards not a lot of money in the open access world, but $1,000 per faculty member once per year. It's on a rolling basis, so we sometimes run out of funding early, like we did this year. But we try to use that for open access. We try to have open access publication sort of geared toward that program. I will say, however, for example, with like books, you know, sometimes you need to pay for the rights to use images in a book. I think we've done that in the past, and I think that would be allowable. Or, you know, you want to help offset the cost of indexing your book, you know, you hire a professional to do that. I think that would be an allowable expense, but not costs of publication per se in terms of like open access.
Okay, so there's a handful of questions around the outcomes side of things. Folks are curious about the collection process. So I know you mentioned Qualtrics. Do you use that exclusively to collect the outcomes? Do you, or have you ever in the past attempted to leverage InfoReady and the progress reports feature there to collect the outcomes? If so, was that a success, or did you have issues with it? So what's that overall look like and how you collect those outcomes?
I'll turn that over to Mariah.
So I will say we have kind of evolved this process from when I came on board and then prior to me working with this team. Right now we are using Qualtrics, but that's something that we use across the board for reporting, especially in terms of just gathering data. Like I said, not just for this program. And so we have worked through revamping this questionnaire. We try and make it all inclusive, just knowing that everybody doesn't do the same kind of work. And so this is something that works well for us. Like I said, we're not steadfast, and this is how it has to be every single year. This was something that Abby and I looked at the end of our cycle last year of revamping this questionnaire, which really did help us this last year when Abby had to create that report. And so just being able to go in there and filter through, like I said, it's not just used for this program specifically, but it does work for us, and it works for us for the time being. Like I said, this will likely evolve as we move forward with the program, as it grows, as our other programs do grow and change. And so it's just, like I said, it really just works for us. And, we've had to sit down and talk about what is important, what do we need, what are we going to use? Because if it's a lot of information that we're not going to use, it kind of wastes not only our researchers' time, but our time as well if we're trying to sift through a bunch of things. So we try and keep it pretty short, short and to the point, but very broad as well. We don't want to box our researchers into something that they're not, or feeling like they're inadequate. We want them to be able to report and to report well, and be able to speak to what they're doing in their outcomes. And that's what's really important, is being able to gather that information effectively and efficiently, just because there is a lot that's riding on this. And so we want to make sure that our researchers are valued, and the work that they're doing is important to us.
And sometimes that's hard. I was going to say, and sometimes that's hard to convey, because sometimes faculty are like, I don't want to fill out a form. And I mean, we've all felt that way. I don't want to fill out another survey, especially one about me. Like, no, I don't. It's none of your business. But it is super important. And like I mentioned before, I this past year I sent out a follow-up to a number of folks who had received funding in the past couple of years, just sort of saying, hey, I recognize that survey that you filled out in February 2018 or 2019 was not the be all end all necessarily. Maybe it was, maybe that's it. Maybe you submitted your journal article and you moved on to a new project. But if you didn't, if it led to other things, we'd like to know that. And so it's, there was a lot of value in that. So I'm thinking of ways to sort of incorporate that a little more regularly into the process, again, without being super burdensome or invasive, which is of course the trick, the balance for any kind of admin like this.
Out of curiosity, have you been leveraging the InfoReady system since the inception of the program to manage it and run it?
I don't know the answer to that question. I believe so, because this started before I got to the office. So
I think the very, very first year, which it was a lot different then than it is now. They use, I want to say it was like just an email. They took an email PDF application of it. And then I'm not sure if we had InfoReady at that time. And then, InfoReady came to Texas Tech. And then that's when they moved it. I'm not really sure what that, I mean, I have the files. So, I mean, we received them in some form. But yes, it's been living on InfoReady since, I mean, as long as Abby and I have been around, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, since at least 2017, I think. And the program's existed since 2015, I believe. So, but I don't know what the InfoReady situation was at Texas Tech that far back. So.
Okay. So out of curiosity, your year over year as you manage this program, do you find any advantages to continuing to leverage through the InfoReady system, whether it's ease of spinning up your subsequent competitions and managing it? Is there any sort of, downsides that you're experiencing as you're going through that process?
I mean, I'll defer to Mariah, but generally I like the fact that it can just sort of roll over and we can, copy and edit as needed, and that it's pretty from sort of the reviewer's point of view, when they don't interact with this all that often, but when they do, it's relatively straightforward for them, and so and even if we have, say, a faculty member who's a reviewer who's served for a couple of years, they'll remember because it's pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know, Mariah, if you have other thoughts about that.
Well, I will add to that, we use this system for all of our internal awards. So a lot of time applicants, if they're, like Abby mentioned, applying for open access or our travel grants that we didn't have this year, they've been in contact with this system in usually one form and another. Even if they're submitting nominations, things like that, they're usually working with this system pretty frequently throughout the semester, especially where internal funding is concerned. I think there are always reservations, especially with our new faculty. It's a new system to them, if they haven't used it before. Usually it just takes a quick phone call, schedule a meeting, even for new reviewers. I've kind of developed a document, like a living document that has reviewer instructions and just helpful tips as they're working through that. I think a lot of us can really attest to the fact that when we're working in a system, there's things that we miss and we just kind of take for granted that are there. And somebody that's new to the system just kind of needs those pointers and how to interact with the system and make it the easiest for them to just be able to go in and either review or apply. There's things that come up that it's like, oh, well, it's there. Like, I don't understand why you're not seeing that. But, on the other hand, putting yourself in their shoes, as a new reviewer, it's there can be a lot of buttons. There can be a lot going on, just depending on what program it is. Some of them are very straightforward and, they don't need a lot of explaining. But I don't think we have any really big obstacles that we're trying to overcome now. And like I said, it's been around for a couple of years now. And we've used or even transferred over things that were kind of living outside of InfoReady to InfoReady, especially where COVID related issues are concerned. And so it's kind of just been that hub and, incorporating into our communications team's newsletters and making sure that people are checking it. We're encouraging them to check not just those newsletters and announcements that are going out, but just InfoReady as a announcement board in and of itself. That's, where everything kind of just goes. And, we work off of that and it works for us and our team.
Very good. All right. Well, that's helpful. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions. So as the initial entries come in, what sort of review process do you do internally to assess those proposals? And do you do that within review, or do you do that outside of the InfoReady system, or how do you do that?
I mean, I try to. I missed a couple this year, but I try to just give them a quick once over in InfoReady to make sure that they're meeting the basic eligibility requirements in the first instance. That's the main thing that I look for, that they are, a faculty member that meets the basic eligibility, and that the project is something fundable that meets that requirement. Beyond that, I don't really, sort of stop the process or anything. Again, if it meets the eligibility, then we move it forward and leave it to the review committee.
Okay. And then along those same lines, can you explain a little bit of how you actually do the review committee assignments within InfoReady? Do you use a committee routing step, or do you use some other means to assign out those committees?
Mariah?
So I work with Abby and we assign okay, let me back up. we have a spreadsheet, and this is kind of like our master spreadsheet. And so that's where we kind of go in and we assign, obviously we're trying to keep in mind conflicts of interest, things like that. And so when we assign those reviewers, we're looking at, departments, just things that come up with, conflict of interest. But we do use the routing steps in InfoReady, and we assign, usually I'm having to go in one by one. It just kind of depends on how it works itself out. But there is some legwork that happens to make this work. And so we do assign, like I said, all of the applications to our review committee to see and be able to review, but they're only required on half to submit those reviews. So, I mean, the comments are welcomed, but we send out that spreadsheet with the list of these are the reviews that you're required to submit for. And so those are the comments that we really take into consideration, because we know for a fact that those reviewers have thoroughly looked at the application. They've looked at the budget, they've looked at the feasibility. But when we come together as a committee, we know that those reviewers are, I guess, in an essence, qualified to speak on every application because they should have already reviewed them. If there is a conflict of interest, we usually know about it beforehand. Our reviewers are very upfront with it. And so, if it's something that needs to be discussed privately or, just in another way, we're able to organize that as well.
I mean, and that usually comes up when it's, partners have applied. That's the main thing, is making sure that partners are not reviewing their partner's work, or that it doesn't get discussed in the big group. So that's the main conflict of interest that frequently arises.
And so, like I said, there is some legwork that happens, but it's definitely not impossible. And so it's something that we found that really works for us to be able to divide those categories for the reviewers. And so there's not a lot, you don't have a lot of questions because these reviewers are coming from that, particular area or that department in particular. And so, like I said, on my part, it's gotten easier. It was really difficult for me when on this first go around to really understand just learning InfoReady and then making this work for us. But we're not perfect. We do make mistakes. I make mistakes. And so, it's really just being able to communicate and just continue to work and make it better.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance, assigning not just in terms of potential conflict of interest, but also, for example, on the humanities review committee this year, there were 2 people from the classical and foreign languages department, 1 person from English and 1 person from history. Makes perfect sense in terms of, discipline. But, I didn't necessarily want to therefore assign all of the applications from classical and foreign languages to the people not from that department, because I need their expertise, but I also have, again, you have to sort of strike a balance and make sure that, again, there isn't a whole lot of potential conflicts of interest, or, because there's always internal departmental politics that, those of us who are not, if you're not privy to that, you don't know that there's a conflict of interest necessarily. And so that's sometimes tricky, but again, that's sort of common to any of these kind of internal review process, at institutions. You just have to kind of roll with it sometimes and figure out alternatives and figure out, problem solve as you go sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. It sounds like, have you considered or explored using the multi-track feature? Because that might be a nice fit for here as well. So if you haven't, that might be something we should chat about offline at some point.
Okay.
One other question that just came in is whether or not you promote this on Engage at Tech Central, your engagement hub. Have you considered doing that, or do you do that?
This is a great question. We are actually in the process of working on collaborating. It's outreach and engagement at Texas Tech. We're actually working on collaborating. There were some logistics that we had to work out. We work a lot with our communications team, so just making sure that we're looking at every possible angle and letting the people who are really equipped to do this work with them, and making sure just we have the right team of people put together for it. But it is in the works, and we're excited to get that hopefully launched here. Like I said, we're working through some logistics on it.
Very cool. And then the last question that we have here is, it sounds as though you've inherited the InfoReady platform. As you've inherited, the system in flight, do you have any suggestions or tips or tricks for folks that may be in similar shoes for you now that you've lived it for a couple years now, if I'm not mistaken?
Go ahead, Mariah. You're the InfoReady person.
I think you just have to be open. You have to be open to ideas. You have to be open to change. Sometimes you run a program, you run a competition, you run an award, nomination, whatever it is, and it doesn't work. And that's fine. And you just, got to go back to the drawing board and really be open to discussing what worked well for us, what didn't work well. Like I said, we've really evolved what we use InfoReady for. And especially with COVID, I know one of the things that we did was we took a process that we were taking in via email and we moved that to competition space. And that one worked fairly well. It was very straightforward. And that was just one of the cases that InfoReady just worked well. It was a simple process, but they're not all that simple. And some of them can get really complicated. And sometimes you're working with other departments or just other organizations within the Texas Tech community, and it evolves, and you have to be willing and open to that change in order to just make it better, because we're trying to streamline process. We're trying to make things easier for people to review. We want people to review for us. We want people to come back and have a positive experience and be able to speak to that. And so we also have to be open to the feedback that they give us. What can we do to make this better? What can we do to make this easier for you? And just being able to go in and tweak that. And, even if it's just something that's very minor. I know we've gone back and not necessarily completely scratched whole awards, but, we have on other, not necessarily Scholarship Catalyst, but for some of our other internal awards, we've reworked them. And whether that's just the details page and how it's communicated across, or even just reworking a form and making it a little bit user friendly. It's really helped us in the long run, and just like Abby said, being able to copy those competitions and know that they work. But it doesn't come without putting that legwork into it each and every year, and being able to jot down notes. Okay, this is what we're going to do for next year. Or this didn't really work. We don't need to do that again. But like I said, it's an evolving process. It's living. And like I said, we're really just open to changing that feedback, and we can't ever get enough of it. We welcome it.
Very good. All right. Well, that concludes the set of questions. So I'll take you guys off the hot seat there. I appreciate your time and the prep work, getting this all organized and sharing your story with everyone that joined the webinar today. I know it takes a lot of time and you've got a lot going on, so I do appreciate that. If anyone on the call is interested in following up with InfoReady, please contact Max Dinerman or Carlos Moncada, and their contact information is there. The next Peer Spotlight, which is coming up next month, is running multi-track competitions with George Washington. And so they'll be explaining how they leverage that feature within the InfoReady system to run competitions that are effectively the same but have variations depending on routing steps or different applications, depending on whatever a gating question might be. So tune in for that. And also, don't forget, we do have a customer referral program. So if you're interested, or if you know a peer that would be interested, you can get some benefits out of that. And finally here, there is a listserv that you can sign up for if you're interested in participating. By all means, go ahead and subscribe and hear the latest and greatest as to what's going on. And finally, don't forget, there will be, you'll get solicited to fill out a post-webinar questionnaire and survey. So if you could, please take a few minutes to share your opinions and feedback with us. We do appreciate it. Thank you all for joining today. Thank you for our wonderful presenters today, Dr. Swingen and Mariah Gonzalez in Texas Tech University. And if anyone has any other questions, by all means, let us know. Otherwise, thank you all and have a great afternoon. Bye now.